It will be important at this point for us to understand the different options for how we can approach rigging a face in order to get it ready for animation. That is to say, what are the main techniques that we have available to us in Lightwave? Well, first of all, there is the classic old-fashioned way of using morphs for phonemes and visemes. This essentially involves taking our head mesh, our face mesh, and we model on certain shapes to it that represent either certain phonemes, that is, sounds that we make, such as things like the E or the O and stuff like that, as well as other shapes, the visemes, which are things like smile and frown and stuff of that nature. Classically, in Lightwave, this is just animated here in Morph Mixer, and so you just, morph along to your animation or your soundtrack or what have you to make the character perform the different shapes. Now, this style of rigging, if you will, is essentially no rig. You just have these individual shapes and you just key them independently. On the one hand, this is nice because it's very straightforward, it's easy to conceptualize. You want a certain shape or a certain sound or a certain facial expression, you just model it in as a morph and there it is. However, dragging sliders around like this to get your shapes put in isn't the most natural of animation controls. It doesn't work like a puppet. Certainly, of course, you can just tie these morph channels to nulls in the viewport so as you're moving those instead, but you are essentially still just using sliders. You're just moving them off of the Morph Mixer interface and into the main viewport when you do that. The principal problem that this method has is that morphs are linear, so the vertices of your object just move in a straight line between the 0 position and the 100% position. For certain more extreme shapes and poses, that can start to make the motion look a little unnatural, especially in the case of something like a wide open jaw, where the jaw will shrink as it hits 50% and then stretch out again as it gets to its, 100% mark. The other problem that you have is that whilst, these shapes might look perfectly nice in isolation, so there we've got an E and, here we've got a smile, okay? They might all look pleasant and fine. You get problems when you need to combine them. So if you want him, making an E, right, for speaking, but you want him to do it a bit while smiling, things can start to distort and you can get double transforms, and that can cause unpleasant results, as we see here with the teeth coming through the lip. As such, this method of setting up and animating a face is exceedingly weak. It gives you very little flexibility and introduces a number of complications. However, it's not entirely to be overlooked. If you've got a character and you're just performing a quick shot of them, perhaps you're doing some 10-second commercial where you've got a couple of characters being like, oh no, and a third one being, oh yeah. Well, there isn't a huge range of facial performance that is required for that job. Why bother wasting the time on a fully fledged facial rig that is not going to get used? It's an idea like this that points out the one strength that this method does actually have. It is fast to create. You just need a character on screen for a couple of seconds to perform a simple, excited expression or an angry expression. All that's needed is the time taken to model it. So whilst in any situation where a character does need to perform more, especially if there's any speaking part that's a number of words or a couple of sentences, this method is totally inadequate. In the grand scheme of things of every possible animation, it does have a place. It also leads us to something, because what we come to realise, of course, is that by having these, unpleasant collisions between different shapes, we can very quickly start to see that the way around this is to have shapes that complement one another and which are designed and modelled specifically to be blended on top of one another. This then brings us to a style of setup known as combination shapes. In this approach, we still have morph shapes, and these are what we are using to actually drive, the face itself. However, these shapes are specifically designed and modelled such that they can be blended on top of one another. They can be combined without giving ugly double transform effects. What we also tend to do with these is, of course, mark them off for separate areas of the face and work them in specific directions. So we have morphs to push the mouth down, we have morphs to push it up, we have morphs to make it narrow, we have morphs to make it wide. Basically up, down, left and right. Now trying to animate those sets of morphs together via sliders alone would be hellishly ugly for an animator, but they can be linked to a series of null controllers. As such, you can take your up and down and left and right movement morphs, and of course have them for each side of the face, and then you get this lovely little puppetry style interface that gives you control like this, allowing you to pose and manipulate your face as a result of combining together multiple morph maps in different ways. This has some lovely advantages to it. Firstly, there's the fact that by doing it through morphs, you are able to control, by modelling, just the exact way that they combine and of course the exact expression that comes out. You're not trying to have to push things around to build an expression at a time. When you move a controller to a given location, you know what you're going to get because it's what you have modelled. It makes it really easy, for instance, as well, to start putting in some of the additional shaping that happens with a face, such as if you look at the underside of the eye socket, when we come up to a smile, that really gets the little lift put in there. I don't need a separate control or a separate system to do it. I'm able to just build it directly into my morphs. And of course, because they blend on from a small to a high percentage, those morphs that, for instance, put this crease and fold in the cheek, or the skin coming off the nose there, that tends to blend in very naturally as the mouth, in this case, gets pushed around. And you get this sort of reaction able to be put around all over the face. It also means that done properly, you can start using a phoneme-based approach, just as long as you set them up in the right way, in the right order against one another, that can give you handy little controls like this little sync control that we see here. Thus, if you're needing to have a character do a speaking part, especially if it's a short one or something, you can get out speaking, animation and lip sync very quickly and easily, while still being able to make little adjustments here to asymmetrize the whole thing, or of course change the expressionality in the other areas of the face quite swiftly and easily. There are a couple of downsides to combination shapes. First of all, once again, they are morphs, so you're just getting these simple linear transforms between positions. Since your overall poses are made of a combination of morphs, it's less problematic, but if you have something that is going between two extremes on a single controller or on a single morph, you can still get that linearity issue. Secondly, they can be quite a pain to build, because of course what you have to do is you have to create all of these morphs to control every little bit of the face and make sure that they all overlap and interact with all of the other morphs properly. That can certainly be time consuming. When it comes to producing this setup, when it comes to actually making the rig, there are two primary ways of doing it. The first is to use expressions, so you have an expression that gets the position of the null and simply uses that to drive the associated morph channel. As you see, some of these expressions can become a little bit wordy. It takes a good familiarity with typing and using expressions to be able to put them together and get it all right, and of course typos will be the bane of your existence. Another way that it can be done is nodally. You can either use nodes to drive the morph channels themselves, or you can just call the morphs in nodal, referencing the null items and driving each morph an appropriate amount. Still a large amount of work, but it tends to be easier to get your head round than the expression engine. That said, once you have built the rig once you have designed an overall rig that is, done, and you're happy with. For any other character that you make, all of the work becomes the modelling of the morphs themselves. Because so long as you create the exact same set of morphs with the exact same names applied to them, then you wind up able to take any mesh that's had the rig set up on it and either copy its morph mixer or copy its nodes, come to whichever other mesh you might have and just paste it on. And the rig is just transferred instantly. All of the rigging work itself really is done here in Modeler. There is also another good point to this, especially if you use the expression method for getting the morphs driven by the nulls. And that is that the rig itself is blisteringly fast. It is so incredibly quick to compute and calculate for Lightwave. As you can see, your timeline can just zip along. It will play back in multiples of real time, even on high density subdivision meshes as we have here. We do lose some stuff, which is the ability to get really detailed poses. So whilst it is of course great that you know exactly what pose and expression you're going to get by moving your controllers because that's how you've modelled them in, you are restricted to only what you have modelled. If you want to provide further little tweaks, like maybe a little tweak at the corner of the mouth here, then guess what? You've got to do more modelling. You've got to do more expressions or nodes to tie them to controllers to get all of those little tweaks and touches in. A rig like this, it's very mobile, it's very expressive. You can get a wide range of expression and shaping from it. But it is still limited in the amount of expressive detail that you can put in by the number of morphs you have and the number of controllers you create. And of course, as you add more and more and more morphs to try and get ever more control over little bits here and there, you wind up with the potential for more and more collisions between morphs, and so once again you've got to work on compensating them all so that they stack together correctly. That said, the combination shapes rig is a really cool rig. It is fun to animate with. You can do a good deal with it once you've mastered all of its intricacies of getting it together, both of course the layout side and the modelling of the morph side. And this is a type of setup that I've covered plenty in past training. We have ample videos on it here from the old RHR training set, all included, showing you the morphs to be created and how to go through piecing together the expressions. And in my RH Nodal series, I also did a video on how to create the same setup but using nodes to drive all of the morphs, which many users do find far easier than writing out all of the expressions and making sure that they are correct. In terms of such training, I really have nothing new to say on it. The combination shapes method has been available through the expression engine since Lightwave 6. There have been no new developments. So whilst creating this type of rig is not going to be the focus of this training, if you don't already have some of those pre-existing videos from previous years, then you will find them included in the old face zip file, and it is a technique for rigging that's certainly worth you exploring and playing with. Finally then, we come to that which is the most advanced of all face rigs and by far gives you the greatest amount of facial performability, and that is the constraint-based bone rig. And it is this that shall be the subject of these videos. This style of rig gives us something that's much more similar to the character rigs that we generally use for bodies. So we have controls directly on the face and the character itself. We grab them, we move them around, we essentially just grab pieces of the face in essence and just manipulate them directly. This gives us a very natural way to actually interact with the face and with the rig. It's very friendly and amenable for animation in that way. Most importantly, because we have bones that are driving everything and these are rotational, then we get true actual rotations of areas that need to rotate, such as the jaw, but also in terms of the flesh on the face itself as it needs to move and stretch and roll over the skull. We're able to build in controllers that give us, quick, simple control over whole pieces of face, like we see here. Just one controller is able to drive each section of lip, the upper and the lower lip. We have just one controller that's able to drive, a whole brow here for us. But we can also have these secondary level controllers that allow us to get in and perform little detailed adjustments like this that let us sculpt exactly the shape that we need for either a given expression or piece of speech or lip sync, to really get the detail that we need out of our character's face, that really allows it to come to life during animation and be incredibly natural and much more believable. Most certainly, if we are going to want to do realistic faces, then this method of face rigging really does trump the combination shapes method by quite a wide margin. As such, if we're after a high quality facial setup that will really make our characters' faces sing, and I mean that metaphorically as opposed to literally, then this method of shaping and designing our face rigs really is the best option that we have got above all others. So there we have it. There is the wrap up of the different types of approaches to facial setup and animation that are available to us in Lightwave. By all means, investigate and have a little tryout of the other methods that we've mentioned. But for this training, this is where our efforts are going to be focused. Putting together these high performance, high quality, high detail face rigs. And so we will move right along laying all of the groundwork for this.